Can dismissive avoidance heal? Can they change? Can they become secure? That's a question I get asked every single day. And the answer is yes. They absolutely can heal. They can become securely attached people. They can become emotionally available. But the question is, will they? In many cases, they won't. And if you are holding out, hoping for this person to change, but they're giving you no evidence that they have any interest in healing and growing, they're probably not going to change. But if they want to and they are all in with the change, they can absolutely do it. And here's how it's done. I've worked one-on-one with many dismissive avoidants who have done the work. They've healed, they've grown, they've changed, they've saved relationships, saved marriages, and built and forged new healthy relationships. The thing is, they wanted it. They wanted it badly enough to do the work. So what does the work look like? Well, for dismissive avoidance, they are people that really struggle with vulnerability. Many of them suffer from alexithymia. That's the inability to recognize and understand their own emotions and the inability to recognize and understand the emotions in others. So the approach of let's talk about your feelings, it doesn't really work too well with them. But what does work is focusing on a change in behavior, a consistent, repetitive change in behavior. That's why CBT is the best approach, cognitive behavioral therapy. It focuses on forming new thought and behavioral patterns because the human mind learns in repetition. Anything we repeat becomes more automatic. And every action and inaction that we take, it actually sends ourselves a powerful subconscious message. When you're doing something healthy for you, you are sending yourself a positive message like, look, I can take care of myself. I can do things that are good for me. When you do a behavior that's bad for you, you're sending yourself a negative subconscious message. And the repetition of these messages and behaviors absolutely has a profound impact on the emotional mind. So, with dismissive avoidance, when they start to repeat new behavioral patterns, especially when there's an emotional trigger involved, it begins to form new neural pathways in the brain because the brain has amazing neuroplasticity, and they begin to write over their old dismissive avoidant attachment patterns. So, for example, when they would normally withdraw and normally shut down and go quiet, instead, leaning into the discomfort and forcing themselves to communicate, even if it's just a simple communication like, right now I'm triggered. I need 2 hours to regulate myself, and we'll revisit this conversation and resolve the conflict. And then they take the step back, they regulate themselves, but they re-engage when they would otherwise avoid. And then when they get overwhelmed to the point where they're flooded and there's so much anxiety that they can't think straight, they do the same thing. They give themselves space and re-engage. But the consistency of re-engagement, leaning into the discomfort, forcing themselves to communicate when they otherwise wouldn't, is actually expanding their emotional capacity. Another tool that in practice actually works for them and expands their capacity is active listening. Instead of just shutting down and getting quiet, asking questions to their partner, questions like what, why, how, getting more information, showing involvement in whatever the person's telling them. And it doesn't even have to be regarding deep emotional conversations. But the practices of active listening, which also can include repeating back what the person said to them to make sure that you understood them correctly, it actually expands the emotional capacity and expands the ability for them to feel empathy because they're teaching their own brain by asking questions that they have interest in what this other person is saying and the perspective and the feelings of the other person. Back in the 1970s, there was a big study regarding attachment, and what they scientifically proved is that a consistent change in behavior results in a change in mood and emotions. So in other words, if you're feeling insecure or avoidant on the inside, but on the outside, you force yourself out of your comfort zone to behave in a secure way, and you do that repetitively, you start to feel secure on the inside too. Fake it till you make it. It really works when it comes to attachment. So little changes in their lives and their day-to-day routine and in how they interact and communicate with their partner, doing things like holding boundaries when they'd otherwise shut down, communicating, revisiting, resolving conflict, little things like that. The repetition of it, it heals. It expands their capacity to understand their own emotions, to express their emotions, and it has an impact the more that they do it. It's not complicated. It just requires the willpower to do something different when there's a trigger. Because any behavior that we do in conjunction with an emotional trigger becomes more sticky in our brains. It becomes more automatic and more powerful. So, no, the approach of let's talk about our feelings, it doesn't work with a dismissive avoidant, but give them an action plan. Give them if this happens, do this instead of that. You give them that action plan. If they follow through with it, every time they follow through, they are expanding their capacity, making all the other aspects of emotions and relationships progressively easier. They can absolutely do it. But here's the thing. They have to want it. Their programming is to avoid. This is a person that was on the receiving end of profound emotional neglect in childhood. Many of them don't even know that they were neglected. They were never shown how to process emotions. Emotions weren't safe. Feelings weren't safe. Love wasn't safe. And this is a person that developed a deep wound of defectiveness, shame, feeling like they are not lovable, like there's something wrong with them. And their instincts are to avoid. And unfortunately, this means that the majority of them don't heal. The majority of them don't change, because that wound of shame that requires self-reflection and accountability to heal is just so difficult, so powerful, that even acknowledging their own insecurities and issues regarding emotional intimacy and intimacy in general is so painful that they won't go there, that they'll do the mental gymnastics to make sure that they are not taking accountability, and they're pinning the accountability and the responsibility for their fears and behaviors on other people and other things to avoid that shame. If they're not showing you any accountability, any desire to change, and no effort towards growth or change, believe them. Because if you're hoping that they'll change despite the lack of effort and no evidence that they will, there is no hope. You're holding on to wishful thinking, because hope is only there when there's evidence that something's likely to change for the better. If they're giving you no evidence and you're holding on, you're just asking for more pain and more heartbreak, because you're putting in energy into a person and love into a person that really doesn't have the capacity to give it back to you. And you're only hurting yourself. So if they're not giving you any evidence that they're going to change, believe them, because they're likely not. We can have empathy for them, and you should have empathy for them, but that doesn't mean that you are obligated to be on the receiving end of hurtful behaviors because of their insecurities and their wounds. You can't fix them. You can't fix them by loving them harder. You can't fix them at all. They have to want it. All you can do is show up for yourself, hold boundaries, recognize your worth, and remind yourself that you deserve love that isn't conditional, that doesn't have to be earned. You deserve somebody that gives you the same effort, energy, and love that you give to them. Don't settle for less just because you feel bad for this person. You deserve the whole meal, not just breadcrumbs. If they want to change and they're showing you that they're invested in change, by all means, be there to help them, love them, and support them. But if they're not giving that effort and they're not taking any accountability, believe them too, because they're just going to keep hurting you.